Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, and today I want to talk about one of the most common words in modern health, and perhaps one of the most misunderstood, and that is inflammation. Inflammation is everywhere. We hear about anti-inflammatory diets or anti-inflammatory supplements, anti-inflammatory medication. And if you've spent any time on social media, you've probably heard someone say that inflammation is the root of all disease. I have many series on Instagram about chronic inflammation and some of the ways that it shows up in my patients. And there's some truth to inflammation being the root of chronic disease, but I also think that we've lost something really important in the conversation. We've gotten so focused on getting rid of inflammation that we've forgotten to ask what inflammation actually is and why we have it. If we don't understand what inflammation is, then we can spend our time trying to suppress one of the body's oldest and most intelligent survival mechanisms. Inflammation is not all bad. That's one of the take-homes that I hope you have from listening to this episode. One of the things that I love most about medicine is that the deeper you study the human body, the more you realize how little of it is random. Our heart beats faster for a reason. We develop a fever for a reason. We might cough or sneeze because we're trying to clear something out of the body. We have pain to let us know to stop because there's something going on that we need to address. Even fatigue, something that we might fight against, has an important purpose, and inflammation is no different. Inflammation isn't evidence that your body is failing. It isn't that your immune system is suddenly deciding to attack you. Most of the time, inflammation is your body trying to protect you. Without inflammation, none of us would survive very long. If you cut your finger preparing dinner tonight, for example, you want inflammation to happen to heal that wound. If you have a cold or a flu, you need inflammation to turn on the immune response. If you broke a bone, you need inflammation to start the process of repair. Without inflammation, wounds don't heal, viruses and bacteria aren't cleared, and our body can't do what it's made to do when we're healing. Even something as simple as going to the gym wouldn't make you stronger without inflammation. Every time you lift weights, you're creating tiny amounts of controlled tissue damage, and it's the inflammation that begins the repair process and allows muscles to build stronger than before. So before we talk about chronic inflammation, I want us to pause for a moment and appreciate something. Acute inflammation is one of the greatest miracles of human physiology. Inflammation is coordinated and intelligent, and it's absolutely essential for life. So the problem is not inflammation. The problem is when a process that was designed to last a few days continues for a few months or continues for years. And that's a very different conversation. And that's the one that I want to have today. If I asked you to picture what inflammation means to you, you might picture walking on a hike and twisting your ankle. Now, the inflammatory response acutely locally on your ankle is going to be red, warm or hot, swollen, there's edema and swelling there, it hurts. These are characteristics of inflammation that were described more than 2,000 years ago before we understood white blood cells, cytokines, or the immune system. Today, we know what's actually happening beneath the surface. The moment that you injure a tissue or your immune system recognizes a virus, for example, or any potential threat really outside of ourselves, a series of events begins unfolding in our body. That is the inflammatory cascade. Blood vessels are going to widen so that more blood can flow to the area. The walls of those tiny blood vessels become more permeable, allowing immune cells to leave the bloodstream and enter the damaged tissue. And chemical messengers begin communicating with one another almost instantly. Neutrophils, they're one of our first responder immune cells, arrive, and macrophages follow shortly after to clean up the damaged tissue, remove debris, and coordinate repair. Then you've got histamine, a molecule that many people associate only with seasonal allergies, actually playing a role that's so important by increasing blood flow and helping immune cells to reach the tissue where they're needed. Every step of this process has a purpose. None of it is random. None of it is accidental. It's all coordinated by our body. The redness you see is actually blood flow bringing that oxygen, nutrients, and immune cells to the injured tissue. The warmth reflects increased metabolic activity in that area. The swelling creates space for those immune cells to do their work. Even pain has an important role, not just get off your ankle if it's a sprained ankle, although that's part of it, that warning sign to pause and stop. But those inflammatory chemicals are actually sensitizing nearby nerves, encouraging you to protect the area while it heals. So if you did sprain your ankle on a hike, but you felt absolutely nothing, you would just keep walking and causing more damage. The body is so wise. Inflammation is not something that just happens to us randomly. It's something our body creates for us. It's protection, it's part of repair, it's part of healing in action. And I think that is so important to understand before we talk about chronic inflammation. So, where does the problem begin? Well, the problem begins when inflammation stops behaving like a first responder and starts behaving like a permanent resident in our body. Imagine your smoke detector goes off because you've accidentally burned your dinner. You want the alarm. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So you open a window, the smoke clears, the alarm stops, and everything returns to normal. If there was a fire, the alarm would keep going and you would get first responders to come and help you with that fire. Now, imagine 6 months later, the alarm is still ringing. Maybe there's a small electrical fire hidden inside the walls that you didn't know about. Maybe there's something producing smoke still that you hadn't found. Either way, the alarm is not stopping. And eventually, you're not sleeping well. You can't think clearly. Your nervous system is constantly on edge because who wants to hear an alarm all the time? The alarm itself begins affecting every aspect of your life. That's much closer to what chronic inflammation actually looks like. It's not dramatic, it's often invisible. And instead of lasting hours or days, it quietly persists for months or years. Instead of helping tissues heal, it begins influencing every organ system in the body, and not in a good way. We've talked all about neuroinflammation in the brain as a root cause of depression. You can go back to those episodes. It's going to impact the gut, your joints, your cardiovascular system, your endocrine system, your skin. We can all think of inflammatory signs and symptoms. You might get acne or inflammation on your skin, eczema, psoriasis, gut symptoms, headaches, joint pain. And acute inflammation and chronic inflammation share some of the same biology, but they're fundamentally different physiological states. As I said, acute inflammation is purposeful. It begins, it heals, it resolves, and chronic inflammation represents a response that has not been allowed to finish. And I think that distinction is one of the most important ideas that we'll talk about today. Chronic inflammation isn't a diagnosis, but it's a process. It's something that the body is doing, which means the question is not just how do I lower inflammation? How do I stop inflammation? The real question is why is my immune system creating inflammation in the first place? And that question has shaped almost every patient I've cared for over the last 13 years. Because inflammation isn't the beginning of the story, it's somewhere in the middle. It's the body's response to something. And if we only focused on lowering inflammation, whether in labs or resolving symptoms, without understanding why it's there, then we risk missing the message entirely. And that is why the first pillar of the Vital Spirit method that I created is recognize and remove. Recognize and remove sources of inflammation. Not because that inflammation is bad. Remember, it's information. But before we can restore health, we have to recognize what the body is responding to. And to me, that's where the detective work of being a naturopathic physician comes in. One of the reasons recognizing chronic inflammation can be difficult is because it's not necessarily announcing itself the way acute inflammation is. When you sprain your ankle, you know where the inflammation is. You can see it, you can feel it, you know where you're focusing your attention. Chronic inflammation is not necessarily that way. Chronic inflammation doesn't typically confine itself to one joint or one organ. Instead, it's influencing systems throughout the body. And sometimes it might seem like they're unrelated, or if you're going to specialists that are only looking at one system or one organ, they might not be connecting those puzzle pieces. So some patients develop brain fog. Another patient might notice that their digestive system becomes more sensitive. They have more food sensitivities. Another patient might wake up every morning feeling really stiff and they assume it's just part of getting older, or they develop eczema. Another patient might have recurrent infections or feel anxious in a way that they never have before. At first glance, those might sound like totally different problems in different systems of the body. But one of the things practicing medicine has taught me is that the body loves patterns. It speaks to us in patterns. And different symptoms can arise from the same underlying physiology. Inflammation is one of those physiologic threads that weaves itself through nearly every system in the body. So all of those symptoms might be related to inflammation because our immune system doesn't exist in isolation, right? It communicates constantly with the brain, our endocrine system, our cardiovascular system, digestive tract, which includes our microbiome. It's communicating with our muscles, our bones. So we really can't think about the impacts of inflammation as separated into compartments or organ systems. And one of the hardest things about chronic inflammation is that it develops slowly. So even though I run inflammatory markers in every single new patient, and so if they've worked with me for over a decade, we've tracked those, we've made sure as part of our prevention and health optimization plan that those never go up and that they feel good and healthy. But say you're not working with someone like me tracking those numbers, well, it's very rare that you would just wake up all of a sudden and be inflamed. If a patient presented and I tested their HSCRP, for example, and it had been normal and all of a sudden it's through the roof high, that's probably the sign of an infection. But most chronic inflammation is happening gradually. We're so adaptable as humans. We adapt to poor sleep. We adapt to bloating after meals. We adapt to afternoon crashes or headaches or brain fog. We adapt to not feeling our best. And we might say, I don't feel like myself anymore, but I hear it all the time that we slowly adapt to this non-normal state that chronic inflammation can be related to. Because when change happens slowly, our brains are going to recalibrate. We compare ourselves to last week or the day before, not necessarily to how we felt 10 years ago, unless I'm asking, what did it feel like for you when you woke up in the morning 10 years ago? Is it different now? And this is one of the reasons that I really do value laboratory testing. I have a whole section coming up later in this episode on that. And it's not because numbers tell the whole story, they definitely don't, but sometimes they validate a story that a patient has been living for years, and they do allow us to have something tangible data to track. So again, I might see elevated high sensitivity C-reactive protein or ferritin that's behaving more like an inflammatory marker than an iron marker, or fasting insulin is climbing, or homocysteine is elevated, or stool testing shows inflammation. Each marker becomes another clue in that patient's story. And as we do the work on those foundations, improving digestion, restoring a healthy microbiome, stabilizing blood sugar, improving sleep, treating chronic infections when they're present, replenishing nutrient deficiencies, and regulating the nervous system. Months later, when we repeat that lab work, HSCRP comes down, ferritin normalizes, inflammatory markers are moving in the right direction. One of my favorite things to do with new patients is look at inflammation in labs and in black and white, make those diet and lifestyle changes, and then watch it drop. But what interests me more than that lab is what is happening with that patient, because every time I hear some version of the same sentence, I didn't realize how bad I felt until I started feeling better. And that is one of my favorite moments with patients, when they begin feeling like themselves again. And inflammation is very often a big part of this. I don't think we appreciate as a society how profoundly chronic inflammation can shape the experience of being alive until it begins to resolve. So much about the standard American diet lifestyle is so pro-inflammatory. So one of the greatest privileges that I have as a physician isn't just watching those lab values normalize, although I love that. It's watching someone remember what vitality feels like. It's why I use the word vital spirit podcast, vital spirit method. Having that vital force turned back on essentially because it's no longer being suppressed by these inflammatory processes is everything. Behind every improved inflammatory marker is a human being getting more of their life back. And the simple question that I'm asking every time I find inflammation on labs or inflammation in symptoms is, what is this person's immune system responding to? Because that is what inflammation is. I'm not asking what disease do they have? What am I diagnosing them with? Or even what supplement or protocol should I recommend? I'm definitely not asking what pharmaceutical drug can I give to shut off this beautiful process of inflammation that is telling me something. But I'm asking, what is their body responding to? Because the immune system is so intelligent. It isn't making random decisions. It is responding to something. Every moment of every day, our immune system is gathering information from the world around us and the world within us. It's listening to what we're eating. It's listening to our hormone fluctuations. It's listening to our microbiome. It's listening to how much we're sleeping, our stress physiology, the infections we have, the air we breathe, the nutrients we absorb, and the signals coming from our nervous system. And then it makes a decision. How should I respond here? And that is one of the most remarkable things about our body. Your immune system is continually interpreting the environment and adapting to it. So when I started looking at inflammation through that lens, the way I practiced medicine changed. And instead of asking, how do I lower inflammation? I started asking, what information has convinced this person's immune system that it needs to remain on high alert? And this is so important. This is what I mean when I say that inflammation isn't the root cause, even though inflammation might be part of all chronic disease processes. We need to know what turned it on. So we're going to end up at the gut, right? If you've listened to this podcast before, we're going to end up here. Not because every single disease starts in the gut, but the gut is foundational to resolving every disease. But the gut is really the most important place where your body is interacting with the outside world. Remember, it's a tube inside of our body that's actually outside of our body. So when we think about the digestive tract, we think about digestion, breaking down food, absorbing nutrients, having a bowel movement. All of those things are true. But the gut is doing something so much bigger than that. It's acting as one of the primary interfaces with the external environment. Every day, your immune system is being introduced to thousands of things and making a decision. Should I tolerate this? Do I respond to this? Do I ignore this? Do I attack this? And that requires extraordinary discernment. And for the most part, the immune system gets it right. You eat breakfast, proteins are broken down into amino acids, carbohydrates break down into simple sugars, fats into fatty acids. The intestinal barrier selectively absorbs nutrients and prevents bacteria and larger particles from entering the bloodstream. That's great. It's this very elegant system, one cell layer thick, and it's separating the inside of your intestine from the rest of your body. But it's one cell thick, right? And this is the key, because if you have higher intestinal permeability, some people call that leaky gut, more information, more food, more bacterial pathogens, potentially more inflammatory markers are going to pass into the body. So we've talked before about how intestinal cells are tightly junctioned. So they're connected by structures called tight junctions. And you can think of them as carefully guarded border crossings. They decide what gets through and what stays out, what doesn't. Nutrients, water, bacteria, they're making that decision. And the immune system is constantly deciding what gets a response. And that's one of the reasons that you'll so often hear that 70% of the immune system is associated with the gut. I don't love using statistics because you can probably poke a hole in some of them, because then you might hear, oh, my immune system lives in my gut. That's not really the point, but it's where the immune system learns tolerance. And just like we talked about in the food allergy and food sensitivity episode, if you're eating foods that you're allergic or sensitive to, you are directly increasing inflammation in the gut, which then translates to inflammation systemically. And when the gut barrier is functioning well, you don't have leaky gut, you don't have a lot of permeability, then the conversation between the gut and the immune system is peaceful. But like every other system I talked about today, problems arise when something disrupts that conversation. So sometimes it's an infection, sometimes it's inflammatory bowel disease or repeated courses of antibiotics that alter the microbial ecosystem. Sometimes it's chronic alcohol use damaging the gut lining, or certain medications like NSAIDs, which increase intestinal permeability, or chronic stress or poor sleep, right? But over time, the integrity of this barrier changes, and then we're getting that leaky gut phenomenon happening. And again, the medical term is increased intestinal permeability. It's a physiologic process that has been well described in scientific literature. It's not a diagnosis, and it isn't the explanation for every chronic illness, but under many circumstances with patients, when intestinal barrier is compromised, then that permeability increases and the immune system is exposed to information it was not designed to encounter. The immune system isn't malfunctioning, it's responding. It's doing what immune systems do. If the border becomes more permeable, surveillance increases, inflammatory signaling goes up, there's more protection, more activation going on, and that's an appropriate response in that situation. So we might see inflammatory markers go up, and that's not evidence that the immune system is overreacting. Sometimes it's evidence that it's reacting exactly as it was designed to do. This is not an episode on autoimmune disease, but when you get particles passing from the gut into the bloodstream, the immune system is then going to attack other parts of the body that look like those particles. It's through something called molecular mimicry. So the question is whether the stimulus has become chronic, and is the immune system receiving this information every day? And if that's the case, then lowering inflammation without addressing what's continually stimulating it is like mopping the floor while the sink is still overflowing. You're never going to quite catch up. And then there's the microbiome. So the more we learn about the trillions of organisms that live within us, the more humbling medicine becomes, because we're not simply human beings. We are entire ecosystems. We have bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other microorganisms that live inside us, alongside us, and perform jobs that we don't do ourselves. They produce vitamins. They ferment fiber into short chain fatty acids like butyrate that nourish and heal and seal the linings of the colon of the gut. They heal that intestinal permeability. They influence neurotransmitter production. They educate our immune system, and they help maintain that intestinal barrier. A healthy microbiome isn't defined by having one good bacteria, it's defined by diversity. Just like a healthy forest isn't made up of one species of a tree, a resilient microbiome really relies and depends on that biodiversity and balance. And when that ecosystem becomes less diverse, or when opportunistic organisms begin dominating the landscape, then the conversation changes, the immune system notices because that's its job, and inflammation becomes part of the response. I'll see this inflammation in those patients' stool tests. So today we covered something I think is absolutely foundational. Inflammation is not the enemy. It's one of our body's oldest protective responses. Acute inflammation is what helps us heal. Chronic inflammation tells us that the body is continually responding to something. And that changes the question that we're asking. Not just how do I get rid of inflammation, but what is my body responding to? In part 2, we're going to answer exactly that question. We're going to talk about food, blood sugar, the microbiome, chronic infections and how they contribute to inflammation, the nervous system, the vagus nerve, anti-inflammatory supplements, because I know you want to know, okay, what can I take for it, even though I'm telling you all this other stuff. And we will definitely dive into the laboratory markers that I run every day in practice and where I actually begin when I'm working with a patient who has chronic inflammation. As always, if this podcast helped you in any way, please download and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, and make sure that you send this to a friend, a family member, a coworker, someone you care about who's struggling with inflammation. So I'll see you in part 2. Have a great day.